All right, welcome to Big Funding Deal. My name is Ryan Baird. We got a great event for you today. First up, I'm gonna give a brief intro of the program, and then we're gonna have Edith from 500 come up here and talk about which accelerator is right for you. We'll then take some Q&A, and then we'll have Anu from YC come up here and talk about how to raise your Series A round. Both fireside chats will be moderated by Barrett Parkman, founder of GWC. But first, I'd like to thank RobotX for hosting us in this beautiful building. This is our co-working space that's just dedicated to artificial intelligence. 3 things I want you to remember about RobotX space. Number 1, it's a community space just dedicated to artificial intelligence and robotics early stage startups. Number 2, we do a lot of startup events here, everything from demo days, hackathons, pitch competitions, and investment matching. Number 3, we also do a number of meetups for the local tech ecosystem. Next week, we're gonna have RobotX FinTech Night, which will feature Adam Draper, and they're gonna be talking about cryptocurrencies, the blockchain, and if you ask nicely, maybe some ICO and IO information. I'd also want to tell you about G Startup Worldwide. It's a startup competition that we run around the world. We invest over $1 million a year into the winners, support them with a global network, and hopefully enable them to grow their business globally. Like I mentioned, we do this all over the world. These are our next 9 events. I would like you to pay close attention, especially to G Startup Silicon Valley, happening on September 14th, right here. I'll give you some more information on that as we go through this. These are some of the VCs that we've had judge our competition in the past. We try to work with the best VCs to help us select the most high potential early stage startups. And the program's working. Since 2010, our alumni have gone on to raise $11.6 billion, and we've had many startups get acquired by some of the top corporations in the world. If you're an early stage founder that's raised less than $2 million and would like to participate, please go to gstartup.com. We're going to have our Silicon Valley event on September 14th. First place winner will get a $50,000 investment and the last spot in our global finals to compete for an additional $250,000 at our Cross-Border Venture Summit event. And all of the 10 startups that get accepted into the program will get a minimum of a $10,000 investment. Please connect with us. If you hear something amazing and want to tweet it, Facebook it, please use the hashtag #GStartup. We'd really appreciate it. All right, let's jump right into the event. I'd like to invite Edith from 500 Startups to come up here, as long as Barrett Parkman from GWC. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Yes.
Yo. All right, great. Hi, Edith. How's it going?
How are you? What's up?
Thanks so much for being with us today.
Of course, anytime.
All right, so it's my pleasure today to interview Edith. She's from 500 Startups, and obviously we're going to talk a little bit about how you as startups should evaluate joining an accelerator. There are many accelerators available to you, many different options, focus on different things. And Edith is going to help us understand the landscape a little bit better. She's going to be as unbiased as possible, but of course she is from 500 Startups, one of the very best accelerators out there. So to get started, Edith, let's just introduce yourself a little bit, and then specifically talk a little bit about where you invest, what are your check sizes, your focuses as well, and we'll start there.
Yeah. To start, maybe I can give a quick overview for 500 in general and how we work. So to start, actually, I think the whole accelerator sort of industry really started with YC. I actually personally have also invested in some YC company and a big fan. 500 started about 7 years ago. Unlike YC, which started in Boston, and then later on moved here, and actually started in Mountain View. So for us, it's no longer 500 startups. It's actually 1,700 startups. But of course, too late for us to change the name, so we stick with that. But really, like the way that I look at it as an investor, the accelerator program is a method for investments. Why is that? Because for us now, we do it 4 times a year. Usually about 2,000 companies will apply. And we actually do all these applications through AngelList online. You basically answer a whole bunch of questions and a video submission. And then out of these 2,000 companies, we will select about 30 to 50 companies, and then we'll give them an offer to invest. And right now, the current terms are $150,000 for 6% of the company. And then we will invite them to come to either San Francisco or Mountain View to spend 4 months with us. The biggest difference between 500 and YC, and actually Techstar also been around for a long time, is we have very, very strong focus on marketing, which means that if you don't have a product, we actually don't recommend you to come at all because we have nothing to work with in terms of marketing or growth. And then we spent 4 months at our office night and day. So there's a lot of classes that we provide. Again, it really focuses on marketing. It is like a startup school. So you attend lectures night and day. We bombard you all type of mentors. And then we end the program after the 4 months with a demo day. Usually, what I've seen recently is after the 4 months, most of the startup, again, it all depends because not all startups are created equally. But most of the folks will raise anywhere for either another 200, 250K up to three or four I've seen right after demo day. And then valuation could be anywhere from 3 million up to 12 or 13 million these days that I've seen.
You mentioned it already a little bit, but there's kind of an ideal startup. I mean, having worked with you a little bit and actually introed some startups to you, I've realized that there's kind of a certain type of startup that 500 Startups is looking for. Can you describe a little bit more that ideal startup that you think is going to really be successful at 500?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, not all startups are created equal.
Right.
And in fact, let's say my background is, half of my career is enterprise software. Siebel, Oracle, Autodesk, and the other half mainly is my tenure with Dolphin Browser, which is a mobile browser mostly on the Android. So let's say if I'm looking at a B2C mobile app, my first question is, have you launched or no? Yes or no? If no, it's not that I don't like you, but there's nothing for us to talk about, right? Because if you're a B2C mobile app, then I'm always going to ask you, what's your install base, what's your MAU, DAU, retention, churn, and even you don't make money is okay, but what could be the potential ARPU? Because now the mobile industry is quite mature. So unless you're working on some really crazy AR stuff, which in my head is actually a feature, right? But if it's something downloadable on iOS, on Android, we're basically looking at some really fundamental numbers.
Right.
Versus if it's B2B, we don't necessarily need you to be, but still, if in a SaaS type model, most of our startup already doing at least 10 to 30,000 MRR already, because now we have such a wide variety, of applicants from all over the world. If it's more enterprise, again, it's okay not to make money, but at least 2 or 3 pilot customers that you can brag about. So to demonstrate that you have basic product market fit. Otherwise, if we're teaching you how to sell and how to actually create your funnel and go through the whole figure out sales strategy and life cycle, but you have nothing to sell, then it's not a really good use of your time.
Okay, right on. You mentioned the MRR numbers for enterprise. What on the consumer side, you said you had some pretty specific metrics you're looking for. Can you give us some specific metrics for a consumer app that you're looking for? For example, William Heathershaw's app. If he wants to get into 500, how many DAU does he need?
Again, because I'm sort of like a mobile freak, right? There's actually, everybody can Google it. I think it doesn't matter with Flurry or App Annie, they actually have a really good reference chart. So let's say, for example, if William is doing a dating app, right?
It's kind of the opposite of what he's doing, just to be clear.
Okay. Okay. So let's say if he's a dating app, and the retention of a good dating app after 3 months, if it's work, probably should be drop off, right? You can't keep looking for a date after a year. That's probably not a good dating app for you, right? And probably at the beginning, your DAU, you're pretty high, but it will go down. Versus, let's say, Facebook, of course, is an extreme example. Facebook, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, install to MAU ratio is 80%. That's insane, which means that, out of the 100,000 people, at least 80,000 people still using it and not uninstall and still using it almost every day. That's like two sides of the spectrum. So you really have to know your numbers. And most of these, App Annie or Apptopia, which is one of my investments, a much cheaper version of it, and all give you actually quite detail in terms of monthly active, or not daily active, but at least sort of monthly active users. So you can get a sense that, okay, am I within range? One of the tricks that a lot of entrepreneurs do, which, by the way, like I would do the same thing too, is right before you pitch for money, spend a little money, so look like it's right, like increasing. Everybody does that, so you can't really fool me. But still, you do have to, show the fact that you're growing, right? Otherwise, and there's another trick, which is when you're pitching, sometimes things happen. We all learn, and it takes time. And let's say if a startup that started in 2015, and now this is 2017, but you still only have 100, 200,000, you really have to think about how you actually explain that. Why did it take you 2 years? So sometimes I may change sort of the way, we did pivot it, or we really like relaunched this 5 months ago. So it doesn't seem like you've been working on the same thing again and again. It still doesn't work.
Right. A minute ago, I think you mentioned you get, on average, about 2,000 applications for 100 spots. Is that correct? For 30 spots?
30 to 50 spots, yeah.
Okay. So what are some of the most common reasons that applications get denied?
It's all numbers, number one.
It's all numbers.
And then I think that the team itself, so sometimes people like to, say that we're working on, but all of them are still sort of moonlighting and part-time and still have a full-time job. If you're not full-time, there's no way. And then the third reason, as you know, we're fixed price investment, right? 150,000 for 6%. And it happens sometimes with international companies that, the terms are not as favorable for founders. Some, really distant, you're still in a seed round, but the founder only have 30% left in equity. Then, after we take the 6%, they will have a very, very hard time to get follow-on funding. And in that case, we usually sort of suggest them to sort of clean that up first before you join. Because a lot of times the founders come to Accelerator, particularly coming to Silicon Valley, is after the 4 months, of course, one of the key goal is to, want our help to raise another round.
Right.
So if the cap table is already sort of messy, there's not much we can do about
I hope
that.
everyone catches that in the audience, that especially if this is your first startup, this is something that's often commonly done, is where you'll get really excited about raising your first round or raising some money, and you might not have done it before, but later on you realize, because of the terms you took on that first investment, it actually keeps you from getting investment later.
Yep. And a couple other things also to think about. I often will share with my fellow entrepreneur friends and say, hey, most investors are really lazy, right? We just like to hang out and drink wine and eat pizza.
Slightly true.
And so I like to encourage people to give me mental shortcut. Are you the Uber for X? But Uber is sort of outdated, so don't do that. But certain platform where it's like people can see visually how that, and then you sort of so it's a shortcut. If you have to use like 3 or 4 sentences to explain what you're working on, is tough, right? Because you just can't get it, or you just can't work with that. A couple other things also. I think there's certain industry we're just bad at, right? We're not good at hardware. We're not going to be the accelerator to help you. And I love the guys from Hacks and Highway 1. They're all like really qualified hardware manufacturing expert. We're not that, right? We're really about marketing. I'm fascinated by genomics, but I mean, if you come and work on a CRISPR-Cas9 stuff, cool, I'm fascinated, but we really can't help you. So there's a whole bunch of industry, really is sort of it's me, not you problem, that we do direct investment. Having said that, we are a VC firm after all, but of course we want you to come to the Accelerator because like our terms are so good, right, for us.
Right. So if I'm a founder that, let's say I've had a semi-successful exit in the past, so this isn't the first time I'm starting a company. I built an MVP, I'm gaining some traction, I'm kind of keeping up with metrics. Why do I need to join an accelerator, or do I need to join an accelerator?
I think there's a lot of second or third time founders that I have funded decide not to join the accelerator, which is completely understandable because you already sort of learn your chop. So, so in that case, let's say recently I've done an investment like Silk Lab, which is the former CTO of Mozilla, AI Sense, which sold Aloha to Alibaba. I mean, these guys are awesome. We still do direct investment, and still the check size is 100K to 200K, and in that sense, no fixed term. We sort of go with that. But I think like the key thing is a lot of the founders, which actually we have a handful of founders will do YC and 500. It depends on like what stage of what kind of needs that they need. I think the key value proposition for us is definitely marketing and
Marketing,
growth.
distribution.
Yep.
Okay, right on. What is say a startup? I get this question quite a bit. I applied to YC and 500 and I got declined. What should I do? What is your advice to startups like this?
So one of my very, very first companies that I work with is a company called Strikingly. And at the time, I think it was just so long ago, I don't want to date myself. They applied for YC once and got rejected.
Right.
And I started as a developer, so if I have nothing to do, I actually like to build websites. And Strikingly is sort of, you create your own mobile-enabled site. And I think at the time, I think 500 as well, like invested in other website builder. So in YCK it was Whibley. So I actually encouraged the team, David and those guys are now in Shanghai, to reapply. So I think the key thing about application is not like like you apply for Harvard or Stanford, you get rejected, and then you're already like 25 years old and you still get rejected and your life is over. It's not about that. It's actually about a process of realizing, another 6 months go by. There are actually a lot of things that you learn and you grow up as a CEO and founder that we absolutely encourage people to reapply again, and again. Because you based on those questions, you become a better CEO in terms of pitching. And we have absolutely taken companies that apply for the third or fourth time because they're like persistent.
Okay, so I think let's combine some of that advice you gave us earlier. So the story is, if you fail at both, go back, spend some money on marketing, show some growth. 6 months later, come back. Try again.
I am, like, on a different note, right? I also invest in things like AI. I think one of your colleagues was asking me a lot of questions about AI. This by nature is unless you're Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon with tons of data, most of the AI related things is B2B. So in that's the case, it's all about your ability to do deal making and have unfair advantage to access to certain sets of data. So you don't have to build it from scratch.
Right. Much of the program is focused on demo day, and of course everyone is really excited about raising at demo day, and typically have the objective of raising around shortly after demo day. What are kind of some, I guess, how much do startups typically raise at demo day on average, or kind of what are the kind of different groups?
Yeah. So what I do found that most of the investors who come to our demo day are U.S. focused. So what that means is, I have definitely seen founders that is not from the U.S. and if they're going after, let's say, from Southeast Asia and want to stay in Southeast Asia, unfortunately, most of the U.S. guys don't invest in startups that they can't drive to and see, right? So in that sense, usually those guys may or may not be able to raise funds. So I do wanted to put it out there. Having said that, there are also non-US and want to go after the US market. And if that's the case, usually right after the accelerator, they stay and set up offices. Those guys, if you're going after US market and usually local, I do sometimes find that, even you're from New York and Chicago, you have a harder time than Silicon Valley, like local startup in terms of raising money. I would say anywhere, like range is 200, 300K. I would say on average, I have seen lately is like $500,000, or some really extreme case. Recently we have I think called Homido or something, raise an A for Sequoia right after. So that's extreme. So it all depends. All about traction, actually.
Right on, right on. Okay, what are reasons if a startup doesn't, if they fail to raise entirely after demo day? What are reasons for that to happen?
Other than sort of the geographic
Other than the
focus,
geographic focus, absolutely.
It's all numbers, and I think the whole point, particularly with 500 startups, people have a lot of expectation because you come from marketing and growth. We have much better pitching coach than I am, but almost 100% of them will, if you don't have month over month 20-30% growth, or even if they don't have month over month, they talk about week over week, which I think is sort of bullshit. But it's sort of from 1 to 2, 2 to 4 is not really like it's 100% growth. But you really have to think, how to prepare for that. So my suggestion is, if you really come through 500 startup program, you should set your fundraising goal, but the even more important is your growth target, because the expectation of the investor could come is expected you come to the program to learn so much that you see results.
Right.
Otherwise, we fail also.
Yep.
So we definitely sort of push you for these two areas.
So is there like a proper timing? How does a startup think about timing of when they should join an accelerator? Because I'm sure some of these examples where someone goes out for demo day and doesn't raise anything, they were just probably, many of them, I having gone to many demo days, were just much earlier than the other companies that did. So how does a startup evaluate the timing of when they know this is the right time to join Accelerator, and in 3 months I'm going to raise that A from Sequoia after demo day? Yeah. Or to position themselves for that at least.
I think regardless of joining an accelerator or not, the accelerator obviously, I think the key thing is so much about education. But let's say even you don't do accelerator and just want to raise a seed, then with or without accelerator, you start thinking about it, which I have no idea like what stage. How many of you actually have raised money before? Okay. How many of you have raised seed? How many of you raised A? Oh, wow. Okay. B, C, and above? Okay. No one. All right. Then everybody else thinking about it. So let's say you start from scratch, and usually start with friends, family, and fools, and your own money. Let's start with that first, right? And by the way, I think that if you are doing mobile, it's just so easy to launch an app these days. You really don't need a whole lot of money. And then for B2B, it's actually, sometimes I suggest people don't even build anything. Just sell it first. That's actually, I think, is even more important. It doesn't take any money either. So to sort of focus on these things, and then you have to think about, all right, when do I need to hire, let's say other than you and your co-founder, everybody just eat ramen for a few months to build some basic MVP. I would usually think about, investor or angel investor, it's like dating, right? You need to have those stands. Like no one was just going to give you a check on the spot unless you're just amazing third or fourth time founder. But you really have to sort of do a lot of homework. And those homework include, number one, as I mentioned, location, check size, and vertical, and stage. And I mentioned earlier, like I've been looking at more like mobile AI type things. Like if you like asking me about like clean tech, I had no clue, right? So not all investors created equally. But I think like the key thing is really have a scope and lay of the land and a strategy, and think about, okay, how much money can I last with, do I have in my pocket to eat ramen till when, right? And I would actually do, when you want money, to start building relationship with investor, you ask for advice first. Barrett, I really want to hear your thoughts about X, Y, and Z. I'm not pitching now, but I'm building this, and I'm hoping that I can get to this by this date. Really, it's just to lure him in. Hey, you're legit. Like, and then next time you see this person, you keep them updated with numbers. I'm gonna update you and say, hey, hey, I grow 50%. Based on what we talked about last month, I'm seeing progress. And by the way, I'm like, oh, I just hired a person from Facebook. Right. It's awesome. So like people's kind of seeing, you will for sure at least get a meeting, right? But you almost sort of like need to, plan for that. This is a little bit more tactical. If I usually would sort of time it in like within 1 week, I'm gonna raise soon. And then when you raise, you basically boom, 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 you see hundreds in a very, very short time to create momentum. Because you don't want to, I think some of our founders too, even gone through 500, and because it's so tiring, to raise money. Your target is $1 million, you raise half. And you're like, oh, okay, like I'm done. But you never finish. So then you end up have to stop working on product and come back fundraising again. Right. It happens all the time, but it's because you don't plan well. And by the way, I know like most investors are kind of lazy, so a lot of people go on vacation during the summer. You just don't find anyone. So I think that there's season for everything, from I would say September, Thanksgiving, like hot month. And then after that, Thanksgiving, Christmas is just a sort of low time. And then after CES, it starts up again till summer. So you sort of have to think about how long can you last. And if I raise in March, you probably should make sure that you can last till at least February. That would be sort of my thought process. So there's like, you have to plan all these.
Yeah, that's really great advice about the timing. That's really good insights. So let's talk a little bit about follow-ons. How often does 500, what is 500's policy on follow-ons? Do you have a policy meaning we maintain pro rata for every graduating startup, or what's the policy?
Yeah, so we do have a standard 250,000 pro rata. It's just a fixed amount because we're a seed fund, so we're actually thinking about doing an opportunity fund because sometimes like we do so many deals, we don't have enough follow-on. So it's definitely something that we're working on. But if you do well, happy to follow on. But sometimes, like it happened a few times with me too. Like I have certain companies that I'm looking at, like they raise A and have a lead and looks good, but it's all about, as an investor, I'm gonna think, okay, I have another $200,000. Should I do this?
Right.
Do I believe that this is gonna, 10x minimum my money, or it's okay to let it dilute a little bit because I'm already early enough. So again, it's all back to numbers.
Right on. And with 500, since you are often investing so early and among the first investors, for those companies that, let's say Twilio, I'm interested to know, how did 500 maintain pro rata over time? For companies like Twilio, do you maintain where pro rata will become hundreds of $millions possibly, or at least tens of millions of dollars? Or do you sell off some shares along the way?
Yeah, so Twilio was our first IPO that, like finally waited forever, for 7 years. I think what usually happened, a couple things. So it's one of those things, you have awesome company, not only you want to hold on to those shares, you want to buy more, right? So our biggest dilemma as a seed fund is we don't have enough money. So sometimes if we do have pro rata right, we may syndicate, because we do have the right. So we may set so that you can just do use, I think $8,000 these days using AngelList and set up a syndicate, and then oftentimes we'll invite our LPs to come and join the syndicate. So at least
SPV.
Yeah, SPV.
Right.
And there's another case, a really, really great marketplace.
I'm sorry, SPV, special purpose vehicle, just allows an investor to go out and raise a fund just for one single purpose. So Twilio, maintaining pro rata is $20 million. I don't have that in my fund, that sort of fund available, so I'm going to go raise a fund just to maintain that pro rata. Okay,
that's correct. So in this case, we do this special purpose vehicle just to invest in this one entity, and that's it. There's also cases where we get in so early, and the company was doing so well. A later stage investor may come to us and say, hey, do you want to sell some of your shares? And in that case, sometimes we'll be like, no, this is doing so well. But sometimes, because we're so early, it doesn't hurt to sell a little bit, right? So in that case, we have some return, and then already get a cost back.
It'll buy some time with your LPs as well.
That's correct.
Appease them a little bit.
Yeah, so that happened as well.
I'm sure. Okay, so 500. When did 500 start your accelerator program, or how many years has it been around?
7 years.
7 years, right? So how has the accelerator model evolved and changed over time? How is 500 kind of innovating the idea of the accelerator?
I think we started, the first one was like less than 10 companies, and now we're doing anywhere from 30 to 50 companies, as I mentioned. I think there's so many changes over time. But I think like the key thing that recently we've been learning as well is doing a special like vertical track.
Okay.
The one that I actually really, and just I don't actually participate like a lot on the accelerator, but the fintech track actually I found it super interesting because fintech company, like I'm not a fintech expert, so a lot of times I look at the startup actually like to work with banks, talk to insurance companies. It's actually quite a bit of like B2B conversation, got involved. So in that sense, like we were able to build a community which is all like banking related. We do like a separate fintech focused demo day, and facilitate a lot of these BD conversation. And we would love to do more of that. On the AI, we have another colleague. I think his name is Chris. Forgot his last name. So he's actually working on an AI track. For the accelerator. So usually what that means is anywhere from like 5 to 10 companies within our existing infrastructure, but they do extra classes and demo day and all that.
Right on. I also think you guys do some shorter sessions, right, in various countries. What Distro, I think has a new name though.
Yeah, it's like a Series A program.
Okay.
So for us, so I actually particularly are doing more and more China-US related deals, and so in that sense, like actually spend most of the time in China now, but we have team in like Korea, Japan, most of the country in Southeast Asia, London, Israel, Brazil, Mexico City, like everywhere, and in some certain cities, and particularly the one that, let's say in London, we have a whole bunch of European companies that actually want to come to the US. But they already raised enough money, and we have expertise to help them to think about, and actually, again, it's like a strategy growth. We do we're testing as well. This is nothing formal yet, but maybe like a 1 month program, but very, very specific goals. Usually, again, is about marketing, but marketing for US market. I'm actually been brainstorming with a couple folks for China market. Lately, there are more and more, I think, international entrepreneur in China from day one thinking about international, no longer just China market. Or the other way around, like more and more particular commerce related, curious about how you figure out Ali and Taobao. And so maybe like we'll do something in Hangzhou, who knows?
Right. So over the last few years, I've seen a lot of what were seed investors and also seed accelerators move a little bit later. So kind of everyone has went from seed to kind of this pre-A. I'm generalizing, of course. It just seems like everyone's looking for traction at this point for institutional checks. What do you tell to startups? The many startups, I'm sure, come to you and say, "I want to join 500," and you look at them and you say, "Well, you're not quite there yet." What do you tell them? But then they say, "Oh, I still need to raise money in order to build this runway, in order to get the kind of traction that 500 is looking for." What is your advice for getting the first check?
I think because now 500 startups, and I'm sure YC is same too, is so competitive. You really have to do your homework. Actually, it doesn't hurt to ask the investor, hey, even I don't get accepted, what will be your expectation for my vertical that you have seen in terms of numbers that, after launch 12 months. So then you can have some benchmark. And you'll be surprised how open, particularly if you're working on something not sort of going to space or autonomous car, if it's existing platform, most of the folks will tell you. As I mentioned earlier, if it's SaaS, it's not uncommon for us to see, at least 10 to 30,000 MRR. So therefore, that will be like my benchmark, right? And then a lot of times, don't get me wrong, I still would like to build a relationship. You just never know. And if there are certain things that I have experience with, usually I like to play with it. So then I can get a sense, is that even have good product market fit? And that's why I think more and more firms, not just 500, have the domain expertise. So what you want to do also is to ask a particular partner, hey, do you invest in fintech? If not, is there any other partner within the same firm focus on the domain that I'm working on? Because the most investors wanted to be helpful, but sometimes they're just not helpful because they don't know what you're working on.
Yep.
So I think it's good to just ask upfront, hey, have you, and the key question would be, have you done any deals in drone. Actually, I was just looking at a drone deal. I have no idea, like what's good, what's bad, right? So a lot of times, either I'll go find an industry expert. Like I'll do that too if my existing team don't have any, that particular vertical expertise. Lately, I was talking to your colleague. I'm really into like China education, right? So what I do, like spend time all day long. Okay, not all day long, but I've been actually like sitting in these education center in China. I'm like just watching. And it's so fun, but I felt like I have to get back to the basics. So then I know like these guys are not bullshitting me,
Well, that sounds interesting. What have you learned sitting in those education centers?
China particularly is so amazing because it's a lot of offline revenue. So if you go to these centers, regardless it's New Oriental or Tao or Chimbury, the manager usually would be able to tell you this is per square foot, like per square foot per month per year. So if they're looking at a piece of, like I have invested one particular paper I love is a STEM education content. It's like a robotics and programming. Of course, I want to pimp out my startup to go to China, but I realized the local operator is so good. Like in their head, they're calculating, okay, this is going to make me another $10,000. So you can't underestimate like the power of, particularly in China, grassroots marketing. That's so efficient. So there's a lot of learning to do. And by the way, even though I'm really off of cross-border, I think is awesome. If you're too early, you really shouldn't. I will be doing a disservice for you if I try to get you to go to a brand new market in a foreign language this early. But of course, we obviously could see there's certain industry that Chinese consumer are really like, fighting for.
Right on. Back to kind of fundraising for early stage. Do you have any advice to startups that are considering alternative forms of funding, whether that be through equity crowdfunding or, of course, the hot word these days, ICO?
Oh, I've been studying ICO. I think it's fascinating. I wish, like, if I'm the founder again, I why give equity away if I can raise $250 million without, giving any
Just
equity?
make sure your wallet is secure, please. So, what, $35 million was hacked from 3 different ICOs today.
Yep. It's definitely a really hot topic. I wish that I'm the entrepreneur today, that I can raise all this money. But I think like the key thing, most of the investors are really perplexed around this. But I was looking at ICO more like say, actually putting back my developer and marketing hat on to find commonality of work will work with ICO and work won't. And most of these are actually super geeky things that have really at least like 20, 40 pages of white paper describing this is how I'm going to use blockchain for X, right? And describe really, really clearly, like if they raise X number of Ethereum or whatever, they're going to use it for marketing, for development, and with no equity. So I'm like looking at all this. I'm like, it'd be awesome if I'm building a company and raise ICO. Like, why would I go through painful experience with investor and trying to do that? But for investor, we are trying to understand it.
Yeah.
And it's been fascinating for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think I'm one of the ones you mentioned that is just confused so far. So, right, especially, because when we invest in a company, we don't consider that the investment could then be hacked and stolen a day later. That's a completely new risk from an investor perspective, right? Which is kind of what's happening today. All right, so moving on, we're about wrapping up. I just got a few questions left, so start thinking of your own questions. What we love to do in this event is to allow everyone plenty of time for questions. So we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for your own questions, so think about that. So a couple last questions. So Dave McClure, obviously, has been one of the face of 500 Startups from the beginning. And now Dave's left 500. How is 500 evolving, changing, remorphing in kind of this new chapter?
I would absolutely be lying to you if I said there's no impact, because obviously Dave is a founder and have made a lot. Well, I don't endorse what he did, but he did actually a lot of good for the community as well. So 500, by the numbers, like as I mentioned earlier, 1,700 startup. 25% of our funded startup have at least one woman on the founding team. And then 1/3 of our staff, including actually most of the partners, 1/3 are all women, including myself, if you can't tell. And we actually started 2 years ago, have a women-focused syndicate on AngelList. So we're actually really, and plus on top of that, we've done so well with a lot of women founders. A SlideShare with Rashmi Singha, Wildfire with Victoria Ransom, so to Google. So just a lot of really good women founders we have funded. So I think going forward, for the last few weeks, I have so many conversations in regards to this. And I think 500 definitely have built a really, really strong community. I just got back from home, and I was worried, actually. We had an event with Alibaba in Hong Kong, but 300-400 people show up, and still 500 really strong, and hopefully 500 even stronger. But definitely adjustment period for us. I think going forward is a lot of change management for us to make sure that this won't happen again. But then I think our whole philosophy of supporting women founder will continue, and definitely we're going even stronger.
Right. You mentioned, numerous times you mentioned international investment, international kind of initiatives of 500. And this is something I've always been impressed. I mean, I worked with 500 when I was based in Beijing, or I worked with Dave, I think, before 500 existed, but it was when helping him with his trips into Beijing. And from the beginning, 500 was all about international investments, beyond not just Silicon Valley, which is very unique. Do you think that more investors should be be more open to international investments?
I think that all investors and all fellow entrepreneurs, if you're not paying attention to what's going on in China, I'll give you another 2-3 years. Like I really feel that Silicon Valley, in so many ways, particular fintech, are really behind compared to China. So I think for the rest of the world, this is only my point of view, but obviously I'm biased because I'm Chinese. But on a different note, also, I think the trend overall in the world, you can quote me on that. For when I work on Dolphin, I went to Russia, Vietnam, China, obviously, Southeast Asia, all over the world to do all these deals. Maybe either there's some communists, because Russia, China, and Vietnam all have their own search, own social, own everything, right? So it's quite unique as an independent ecosystem. And the rest of the world, regardless is Europe, Latin America, most Southeast Asia actually use US-based product in terms of search, social, similar thing. So which means user acquisition is actually quite similar in terms of doing deals, but Russia, China, and Vietnam, very, very different. Which leads into those countries with no Apple, no Google, no Facebook. They have a very unique way of different sort of invention. I'm sure that you do the same thing. For the last few months I've been in China, I didn't even have to open my wallet once. The taxi driver don't even want to give me change. Just like, can you just either use Alipay or WeChat Pay? It's just so convenient. Every time I come back, I felt like it's backwards. So I actually think going international is not just a nice to have. We are international citizens. We need to open up our horizon to learn what is going on in the world, to better adjust. I think, frankly, like Facebook Messenger been copying WeChat the whole time. But how do you get those inspirations? By going international to really learn. Even you make a conscious decision that you're not going to go overseas, but at least you know. I think that's the key thing, is to really gain that knowledge by going international and just learn.
Right. And it's the same for entrepreneurs, not just investors, right? Right. All right, on that, we will end my questions. It is now all of your turn to ask. So I'm going to hand my mic off to Ryan. Raise your hand.
Questions?
No.
Go ahead and state your name and your company.
Good evening. My name is Abdul. I'm from Senegal, West Africa. My company's name is Volcano, and we're into education technology. So my question is, you mentioned investment in international investment, but what about Africa? And not just English Africa, but also French-speaking or Lusophone Africa. What are your takeaways on that? Thank you.
We for Africa, I actually, Egypt doesn't count. But anyway, we actually just organized a Geeks on the Plane Africa that happened in March. So we actually brought a group of investors and entrepreneurs to visit a handful of countries, I think Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, just more like to learn, but doesn't make us an expert at all. I would say that unfortunately, even though it's such a huge potential market, as I mentioned earlier, things like M-Pesa, which have been super advanced in terms of mobile payment, they've been in Africa for a long time. US is actually quite behind. So there's a lot of like things that I think the investor here need to learn and explore and understand. But unfortunately, like it's not necessarily things that you want to hear. I think most of the Silicon Valley investors are quite ignorant. So if you're here to explore maybe potentially, hey, I really wanted to raise money here, you need to know that it will be a challenge. But having said that, I think being here, you're already taking the first step, is to think about what other education technology company that is similar to yours. Actually go and visit those guys first. I mean the founders. Because then first you can understand, you know, how they run. You can learn from them because it's similar. And sort of what sort of pitch point. Usually the minute you say education technology company, I will ask you a whole bunch of follow-up questions. Who's your, is it consumer or is it B2B? What sort of age group? Like just more like get a better sense. So to start, I will probably sort of get a better one-liner, but you can learn so much from these other founders. The founders are the best group of people to help you to refer to investors. Because no investor want to say no to the founder they already put money in. So it's a great way to get intro to invest. Of course, if the founders are comfortable. I think that, you know, a little bit the other way around, one of, I think, the best deal ever on earth is done by a South African investor, which is Naspers, which still haven't sold a single share of Tencent. I think still own 33 or 34%. So surprisingly enough, this is the deal of the century. It's done by somebody who is actually not in the valley to a Chinese company, right? So there's tons of things that's going on, I think, internationally. But I look forward to going to visit South Africa. I can't wait, actually. But hopefully soon, maybe next year.
Hi. Thank you for this interesting and frank conversation. Appreciate it. My name is Sangeeta, and the name of my company is HelpC. We focus on automating clinical work to save the clinicians' time. So my question for you is that for healthcare companies, digital health companies, once you build a product, you made it HIPAA compliant, you see there is a need in the market, there is a certain amount of investment that's needed to operationalize at a hospital, even to do pilots or to do marketing, because in healthcare, the exhibits and the booths are pretty expensive. So to go to your earlier point where you're looking for a certain adoption rate before you do investment, how does that fit in for the healthcare space specifically, like, especially like when it's B2B?
Yeah. I think we have not done enough of a good job in terms of investing in B2B healthcare to start. And then I am also not a healthcare person to look at these sort of, but we do have 2 people on the 500 teams that are, like that's their focus. So I'm happy to, you know, and usually in a situation like this, it's actually a perfect way to meet investor, right? That, who is investor in the house other than me? Okay, you scared of, okay, all right. So usually the way that I will respond to you, I'll tell you, like, I'm not an expert. If I have done something before, I will ask you, like, fire up a whole bunch of questions. But usually I would ask you, hey, can you send me a short blurb? Because you're B2B, so I will hope that hopefully you come from that background and hopefully have some unfair advantage in certain clinic or hospitals, so that you have, you know, some foot in the door. And in your short intro, if you have things to brag about, if you haven't launched, usually I would brag about the team. Hey, we're all like X, fill in the blank, team that worked together for X number of years, and our proprietary is HIPAA compliance, and just I have like, I don't know, 5,000, you know, pending, you know, whatever the filing and patent pending and all that stuff. I will like brag as much as possible, so at least you can get a meeting. But that short intro need to be super clear. You can't be an essay, otherwise I'd be like, oh my god. Like, so what I usually would do is, on something that I don't know, will pick the expert and forward it to them and ask for permission. Hey, would you like to check this out? And usually for the expert, they would tell me right away, not interested, interested. So at least I have something I can respond back to you. Yeah.
Hi. My name is Marie. Oh, hi. My name is Mariko Araya, and I'm from Lady Maria AI Wedding Planner app. And I hear from you that 500 Startup really focus on marketing, and I was wondering what is like the big failures startups come with in the marketing space that you guys help with. I wanted to hear more about 500 Startups specialty in the marketing space, for in more detail.
I see. I can give you a whole bunch of names, sort of not exactly the wedding space, but sort of in the, I guess, women. We invested in a whole bunch actually. Style Seed, Ipsy, I can't even name it all, but we definitely have done a lot of commerce and marketplaces. I just got an update from this company called Babylist, who's doing amazing. So definitely we have done a lot of consumer-focused marketplaces and commerce. And we also have people just focusing on that. So whenever that happens, we will usually look for partners who have done similar deals, and then ask them for, hey, what is some of the basic metrics after you launch for 3-4 months for U.S. market? What are some of the numbers that you look at? And then so we can give you a little bit more concrete feedback.
Hello, my name is Mirsad. I am representing a company called Playonomics, and I was just wondering, actually, the whole investor field, right, is in the Silicon Valley, everybody talks about tech companies, tech, right? What is some of your recommendations for companies who are not necessarily in the tech realm? So for example, in human resourcing or entertainment or something of that sort. What can you say as far as raising seed money, seed funds, or going to Series A for companies that are not necessarily this standard in the Silicon Valley, so to speak, like tech companies or whatever?
So I obviously focus on tech, but recently, actually, particular for China, I've run into a lot of entertainment-related potential deals. Actually, live streaming is a huge thing in China. And lately, Chinese started to pay for content too, so it's also entertainment-related. And in fact, actually, two of my best performing companies, Hook and Dated Cook, are both content-related. You can consider that an entertainment. So I think the key thing is I don't invest in studio or pure for content, movie studio or animation. That is not my thing, right? So if that's the case, I feel but don't quote me on it. It seems like there would be more absolutely in Hollywood. There's actually a handful of I don't remember the name. I can get you the names afterwards. That they literally label themselves they only invest in entertainment, right? So usually those sort of metrics and benchmark, since I'm not an expert, they have their own thing. But it just seems like there's so many sort of ex-legendary or Pixar guys. I have invested in 2 VR sort of content-related companies, and both of these guys are ex-Oculus and Pixar folks that have came out and then working on those. So that would be entertainment. I really think that every single vertical, there are people specialize on it. And a lot of times what I would do is to find companies' name in that category, and I just use Crunchbase quite a bit. Let's say you're in real estate, then go figure it out who invested in WeWork, let's say. Entertainment, there are tons of studio in LA is getting funded, and so is China as well. And WME, Legendary, even the Disney of the world are investing also. So it's not difficult to figure out who they are, but it's just a matter of sort of navigate and your framework of, can you get to those founders who can introduce you? Can you maybe you just do cold email, but it's so written that they have to respond to you. but you can find everybody. Because, like you realize investing, like, is our job. We have to deploy. I can't like sit on my ass and do nothing, right? I have to meet founders. If I'm not deploying capital, I have a problem too. So, whole thing being an investor is hopefully, who knows, like maybe you're going to be the next Elon Musk, and we want it to be as nice as possible. Of course, we respectful for each other's time, but I think like the key thing is that be as clear about what you're working on and figure it out who is in your vertical and ecosystem. That's the key thing. Like I can't help you with entertainment, but somebody can. And I think a lot of these data are quite open these days. You can find out who they are.
Hi, my name is Trisha Bright. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Good Social. And as the name suggests, I'm a social impact entrepreneur. And I'm wondering what the perspective is at 500 Startups on companies that have a double bottom line focus. So my shorthand way to describe that is profits with purpose. Do you invest in those sorts of firms? Thank you.
Yeah, we recently, and I apologize, I don't know the exact terms, but we either invest or we worked with Planned Parenthood. It was actually an initiative we were actually working on, and I believe YC actually have invest and work with a nonprofit as well. And I don't know if we're making a whole initiative out of it, but we absolutely have worked with like social impact startups before. Yeah. For profit, but social enterprise, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Last question.
Hi there, my name is John. I'm the founder of a company called Ondaka. We do AR and VR data visualization for oil and gas. For an enterprise company, what sorts of metrics do you look for investment? You mentioned a number of POCs that are live, but given more capital needs to get to a POC, what sort of metrics do you look for?
So if you start with no metrics, so I can't force you with any metrics, right? But I think like with B2B is really to think through, to have a better sense is if you understand the sales cycle, the potential size of the market, and if you do land a pilot, what does that mean like in terms of the actual contract that you will be able to land? So let's say a lot of times, like this morning I was talking to a San Diego entrepreneurs. They do amazing, awesome robots, but I mean, they have a very, very hard time getting pilot. And even they do one pilot, they don't buy. So it's really a matter of like looking at just the tech is not enough. You have to see, do I have an awesome product person plus a really good salesperson? And in fact, if you're really good with sales, sometimes you can sell it first without no product, which is all of my Oracle and Siebel companies before. There's no product. They sell millions of dollars. So in that case, it's really thinking through, would you be able to land a whole bunch of these pilot early, and then after the pilot, you can actually get, at least, 6-digit type value. Hopefully that helped.
All right, thank you very much, Edith. Let's give her a round of applause. Next up, we're going to learn how to raise your Series A round with Anu from YC. Come on up, and Barrett's going to moderate this fireside chat as well. Let's give them a round of applause.
And you're back. I'm back. All right, I have the pleasure to have Anu from YC here. Anu, actually, I'll let her introduce herself even more in a moment, but she leads the YC Continuity Fund, so she's doing everything post-Accelerator. So today we're going to talk about how to raise your Series A. So for the past hour, we've been very focused on going from zero money to maybe pre-A, right? And right now we're how to raise our A. So just think a little bit later than we have for the past hour. So why don't you just start out by introducing yourself, and then talk a little bit about the specifics of your investment, check size, geos, things of that nature.
Sure. So I'm a partner on the YC Continuity Fund. It's a fairly new fund. It was launched only a couple of years ago, but it's still under the YC umbrella. And the primary purposes of the fund is really to invest growth stage companies. And what we mean by growth stage is you have strong product market fit, and you've sort of figured out a playbook, and you're raising money for scale. Because it's a growth stage fund, it tends to be, roughly Series B and above, not necessarily Series A. So there is sort of this gap where when you come out right out of the accelerator, they actually, raise during the demo day that we have. And the idea of the fund was not necessarily just for investment. It was really to help companies scale. So YC's early stage, the core program, actually does a fantastic job of teaching you how to start a startup. So even if you're noodling with the idea and you have 3 to 5 people or maybe just 2 co-founders, the early stage program teaches you how to get from there to 20 to 30 people in the company. How do you figure the product market fit? I think where there is a gap, which is what YC Continuity is trying to do, is you have a company with a strong product market fit, maybe 40 or 50 people, and you're trying to go to 200 or 300 people. The role of the CEO really changes, right? It's no longer about just product. It's about who do you hire? What should your senior exec team look like? So that's where YC Continuity plays a role.
Right on. And to be clear, I'm pretty sure you don't only invest in YC startups. Is that correct?
Yeah, so our core focus is YC.
Okay.
Because why would it? We have an awesome portfolio of startups, so that's where we spend most of our time. But nothing stops us from investing in non-YC.
Okay. What percentage of your of your investments are non-YC startups?
So far today, all of them are YC.
Okay. 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 The first one will be from this audience here tonight. Okay. We all have an objective. Does YC lead deals at A and beyond, or are you always joining in someone else's?
So from typically we don't do the traditional Series A. We actually do Series B and above. So growth rounds.
Actually, can you explain why you don't do the A?
Yes. So I think the primary reason we decided not to do the A was for signaling purposes, because we have 120 companies each batch. Actually, I think we've run the math on this. Majority of them actually don't raise the Series A right out of the batch. Actually, they tend to raise around 12 to 18 months since demo day, because they're still quite early, but they raise seed amount. But anyway, because that is, that was historically the core of YC and still is, we didn't want any signaling risk of us cherry picking. And so therefore, the fund itself was also raised for a different charter, which was, can we come up with a growth stage, sort of program or community that helps scale CEOs. So our core focus, therefore, has been Series B and above.
Right. I don't remember.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Do you lead deals?
Oh, yes. So, yes, we do lead or participate. So growth rounds are really large. It's also not a zero-sum game. So if you're raising a $400 million round, chances are you have more than one investor. In that case, if we may lead if it makes sense, or we participate if it makes sense. So I would say right now, of the investments we've made, it's pretty mixed. In some cases, we've led, and in other cases, we've participated.
Okay, okay. And how do you differentiate yourself from the Sequoias, the Benchmarks, the Kleiners? YC, as a growth fund, is very young, all right, just a few years old, whereas Sequoia and many of these have decades of experience and also reputation. So how does YC differentiate at this stage?
Yeah, so I think, the biggest pro there, or the plus there, is the YC platform, right? I mean, a lot of our founders probably raised their first check from YC. And some of the companies probably wouldn't exist today if not for YC. So I think YC is family first, founder first. We have a very strong community. As a growth stage continuity fund, what we try to do is actually provide advice in scaling. So this is where I think we spend a lot of time with the founders in their growth stage, walking through who do you have your senior exec team today? Where are the gaps? What does it take to going to be 2 years down the line? How how can you improve your hiring and recruiting practices? And the great part is we have a lot of growth stage successful CEOs like Airbnb, Dropbox, Stripe. So it's not just Ali and I. Ali is the other partner on the fund. It's not just the two of us teaching. Our other successful growth stage CEOs actually spend a lot of time with these CEOs on mistakes they did, lessons that they learned, and how to scale better. And it's not just the CEO, it's also the senior execs in those companies who spend time with the CEOs telling them, why should you hire a person like them? And I think it's the power of the community, even at the growth stage, that really helps differentiate us.
Right. And a key part of that community, of course, is our VCs themselves, right? So how do you lead? You're in some ways competing with Sequoia and the Kleiners and Dreessen. How do you do this in a way that doesn't damage the relationship? Because, of course, part of the strength of YC is the ability to help startups raise a significant round shortly after demo day, at least, from many of these firms. So it's kind of a delicate balance that you have here. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, actually, it's not been. It's not been that hard in the sense of we've done about 10 or 11 investments. Most growth stage rounds are really large. For example, Instacart, right? We actually invested in their most recent round. We were one of the participants along with Sequoia. I think they raised around 200 to 300 million. And so you do see that in most growth stage rounds, it's not a zero-sum game. More often than not, you actually have more than one investor. And second, we don't do any Series A. So therefore, we actually come in much later. And a larger portion of our portfolio is actually even more late stage. So we have few Series Bs, but a lot of them are Cs, Ds, and Es. So those rounds are typically really large.
Right. And just to be clear, everyone, she was also at Andreessen before YC, where you did do Series A deals. So she does have lots of experience on raising A's, despite often focusing on B and later at YC.
And we also advise a lot of our YC early stage when they raise their Series A.
Of course. Of course. I believe you taught how to raise a Series A to the last batch. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Right. So we have the right person in the chair right now. Let's talk about let's get right to it about raising a Series A. How does many people in this room, and we took a poll a moment ago, has already raised a seed round. What is the difference between raising a seed round and raising an A? What are some of the different dynamics that people should be aware of when they're walking into their A, having been successful at seed?
I think the investor base is different, right? There are very few institutional funds that do seed, but when you're going to a Series A, it's about running a process. It's about meeting the firms and evaluating whether they are right partners for you. A lot of times founders often do the mistake of thinking, oh, I just need to meet everyone, make sure that I convince them about the company, and then figure out who wants to invest. I think the mistake there is you should also be evaluating whether that investor is the right partner for you, because they're going to be on your board for more than 10 years. And so, you wouldn't do that decision lightly if you were choosing a partner. And I think that's the same weight you need to put in when you're running your Series A process. So one is that it is a much more structured process than what a seed is. And so when I say run a process, it's more, if you decide that you're going to raise your Series A and it's the right time, it's about meeting how many of our firms you want to meet. Typically startups meet anywhere from 8 to 10 to 20 to 30 firms, right? But you do all those meetings pretty much in the same period because you want to choose the right investor for you. And so doing the meetings at the same time helps optimize for that. Second is, you have investors want to see how good a storyteller you are. And it's not because they're testing you for storytelling skills. It's more, are you able to articulate the vision very clearly? Are you able to convince them? Why? Because that's how you are going to hire your team. And if you can't convince your investors, then how are you going to convince the engineers who we are trying to recruit? So that's sort of what they're trying to figure out, which is why I would say more often than not, firms require a deck. And so the deck is the arc of storytelling, communicating what you're building, what has been the progress so far, and what are you going to do with that capital, right? So it's really 3 elements. And I often tell founders this, the first element is the team. Right, you're still early. So why you, and why are you building this company? Why are you the right team to build this company? Second is product. So what have you learned from your seed round? Do you think you have product market fit or not? And what pain point are you really solving, right? What is the product really offering? And then the third step is use of funds. So you're raising for a reason. What do you plan to do with that raise? And work backwards from the next raise. So if you think you're going to raise, say, $8 or $10 million, you need to have a plan on how long is it going to last, and what milestones do you plan to hit with those dollars. And so you work backwards from the next raise.
Right, right. In the last session with Edith, something interesting came up about the mistakes that are made at raising an angel round that could affect your ability to raise a seed round. I want to ask the next stage of question to you is, what are the mistakes that you often see entrepreneurs make in their raise at seed, whether it be terms or something on the cap table, that will hurt their ability to raise an A round?
I think the terms alone are not a deal breaker if you really have a company with strong product market fit and you're trying to raise your Series A. I mean, you will be able to raise. I think the one important thing, if I had to point out, would be founder equity. So I think investors really care about founder equity because you'll go through a lot of ups and downs. It's very hard. Startups are hard. And so the reason why they're paying attention to how much equity you have is, that's a sign or a signal for whether you're going to commit yourself to stay. And so if you end up selling a lot of your equity and you don't have enough ownership in your that may be something that a Series A investor really pays attention to, because that's a sign of, a question will raise in their minds as to, is this person or is this team committed to actually building a great company? And related to that is co-founder equity. And I want to bring that up because especially I see too many founders, or at least in the early stages, doing that mistake of where you may have 3 co-founders and maybe 2 of them are equally important to what you're doing, but then the founder has like disproportionately high equity, and so what's in it for the co-founder to stay?
Right. Yeah, actually, I believe YC generally, at the early stage, recommends having equal co-founder equity, even if one's CEO and one is VP of product.
I mean, I think it really depends from a situation to situation basis. But for example, if you're building an AI company and your co-founder is core for AI, while you probably have domain knowledge and you have disproportionately more equity, then probably you're putting the company in jeopardy. Right, so you have to determine whether the co-founder is core to what you're building and how you plan to scale, because it's about long term. It's not about optimizing for the first year.
Right, right. A few minutes ago, you mentioned that even YC companies, I think you even said majority of YC companies don't raise an A, at least shortly after the demo day, which I think probably comes at a surprise to some people. Many people probably. I know I used to have the perception, all YC startups raise an A after demo day. And that's definitely not the case. And in fact, I think research shows 70 to 80% of startups that raise a seed will never raise an A. They'll fail to raise an A, and that's a stat you'll hear in this event almost every month, because it is so important. And I think people don't expect the difficulty of raising an A. What do you think are some general reasons that you see time and time again, especially from YC startups that aren't able to raise an A, not just after demo day, but not able to raise an A at all? What are the most common reasons startups don't raise an A?
I think the main reason why they may find it difficult to raise an A would be because maybe the product is not truly solving a pain point, or it's too niche a market and they don't have right product market fit, and they may have burnt a lot of capital, but not, the product is really not taking off. That's usually the most common reason as to why they find it difficult to raise an A. Because think of it this way, as an investor, if someone wants to put 10 million into the company for Series A, they want to see some signs of it working. So what does that mean, right? So let's take Airbnb as the example. Like, what would someone as an investor in Series A wanted to see in Airbnb? I mean, they would have looked at, okay, all that Airbnb does is list homes and you rent homes, right? So the room night is the key metric that Airbnb tracked. So a Series A investor is looking for, okay, is the product really working? How do you figure that out? Growth is the number one thing. So how is the monthly growth? If your product is really taking off, your monthly growth is going to be pretty solid. When I say solid, it's usually more than 15% month on month. Greater than 20% month on month is considered hyper growth. And so those are signs that it's working, right? The second thing they look for is, well, is it working because they paid to acquire users, or is it organic? Because if they didn't pay and it was all organic, then you're truly solving a pain point because of which your product is taking off. In Airbnb's case, I think they spent zero on acquisition of guests. Zero at the time of Series A. That's a very strong signal. Well, the product is really working. It's early signs. Now, what was their GMV or run rate really varies. If you have few $1 million, even low single-digit $1 million GMV run rate, but all organic, and you're growing healthy month on month, now you have the attention of a Series A investor, because they go, wow, if this company $8 million, they're really going to accelerate. And you still not figure out everything. You will still have to, there will be other problems that come at scale. But you have something that's working, there's demand for it, and so they feel comfortable investing. And second is team. I mean, I would say first is team and second is product. But they also look at the team and evaluate, especially the founders and the co-founders, to figure, is the team that I can bet on that they would go build? And to a large extent, your progress so far is also an indicator of that, right? Like if you have organic growth, which means you were really careful about the way you spent your money. You really worked very hard to get the product to work. And that was true for Airbnb. They didn't have a product working for almost 2.5 or 3 years. So they didn't raise their Series A for that long. And so sometimes it takes longer, but it's worth spending little money to make sure that you really have a product that's solving a pain point before you go and raise Series A capital.
Right on. Let's shift and talk a little bit about valuation and terms, because I think this is a lot of questions, especially from first-time entrepreneurs, are about this. So what are some terms that you see that founders often misunderstand, and which ones should they be most concerned about, and which ones should they ignore? So a few questions in there, but basically, which ones should they ignore, which ones are most important?
I think the two most important things are, one is your own dilution and how much ownership equity is the investor asking for. As I said, I think it's very important for the founders and the co-founders to have enough equity to stay in the company and be committed long term. So you should care about what the dilution is. But I think founders too often either, don't understand that and just, don't pay attention to it, or are at the other end of the spectrum where they're too sensitive to dilution and therefore are optimizing for the best valuation and not the best partner. And I think there is a trade-off. You should balance both. Ideally, make sure that you have enough equity for the entire founding team, not just yourself as the CEO, but also the co-founders, so that you can stay committed, so that everyone will stay committed longer term, and optimize for picking the best or not just the highest valuation.
Right. Is there a maximum amount of the company a founder should sell at A?
I don't think there is a strict rule of maximum, because it's really dependent on your traction. The further along you are, the lesser dilution you have. At this stage, for a Series A, the valuation is more art than science. So for example, if you're really early and you're building an enterprise company And because early stages of enterprises, you usually have SMBs as customers. It takes a long time to get an enterprise contract, definitely not in your Series A. And therefore, investors typically at that point are taking higher risk, so they may ask for 25 to 30% ownership in a Series A. So if you're raising, $5 million, it's literally 5 divided by 0.3. That's your valuation. There's no more science to it than that. But if you're a consumer company and you have a lot more traction and than normal, then you may be able to raise it at, say, 20% ownership dilution. So like the VC is asking for 20%. So that's typically the 20 to 30% is where usually the range is. Sometimes a little lower depending on traction, because sometimes company bootstrap for a longer time. Anything more than 30% is worth asking yourself, why is that the case?
Got it. Got it. What are some methods that you, as the investor, are using to define the valuation? You mentioned it's a little more art than science. From the investor standpoint, how do you arrive at a valuation? How much is it what the entrepreneur is demanding versus what your analysts are saying the company is worth?
Yeah, so I think for Series A, it's really only ownership. It's not looking at comms or saying, oh, SaaS companies trade at 5 times 1 year forward. It doesn't matter, because more often than not, at your Series A, you may have 1 million ARR, right? So the bet is really that someday you'll be a very big company, and is the market opportunity large enough that can we envision that this company will be at least $1 billion company, right? And so that's the test, and then the valuation is more ownership, because the investor is also taking huge risk at that stage. But when it comes to B and C and D, that's where you look at comps. You look at how are companies trading in the public market, especially looking at margin profile. How are other private companies, getting their valuations? Like, what multiples did they get for what growth rates or for what margin potential? So I think that element comes in more in the B and C.
Okay, right on. And YC is always very founder friendly and does a good job of kind of looking out for their own startups. And even, to my understanding, has a kind of a database of VCs and with some kind of reputation information in there. And you also will naturally see probably some bad behavior by VCs and bad behavior regarding terms. What are some terms that you see that get put in by VCs sometimes that you want to kind of warn startups to be aware of? Any terms they should be kind of be cautious about?
I think that, having structure in your Series A is probably not a good sign. Asking for more ownership than what's typical industry standard is the other. I would say that is the biggest one, because sometimes you may be seeing 5 million for the first time, and if it's, if they're asking 5 at like a 40% ownership, sometimes founders don't realize that, they actually can push back on that. And so that's the most common, I would say. Second is looking at or vetoing who would be on your board. You don't want to give up that. You want your board composition. You should be able to decide who you want on the board in subsequent rounds. Those are things I would say you should definitely pay attention to. And always, please show your term sheet to a GC or a lawyer before you sign it. Absolutely. There are enough, firms in the Valley who've seen so many term sheets from the same firm, and they can advise you on what they normally do versus not. So I would definitely show it to, get legal input before you agree to any terms.
Right. And she mentioned it twice, is about really being cautious about who gets on your board, right? It's a marriage of sorts for 8, 10 years and beyond. It can be great, and it can also be a disaster. It's something to be very cautious about, as she said a couple times. Let's talk about founder hustle. So you mentioned earlier, I think, founders need to meet 20, 30 investors. I've often heard founders tell me they're meeting with 50 investors. How much time does a CEO need to devote to fundraising, A? And B, if it is so much, how do they manage their company and continue to build product and continue that trajectory they have up until then during the fundraising process?
We advise our founders to at least have 2 months, if not more, especially if they're going to run a Series A process. And even if you start with a list of 50 firms, you should have tiers. Tiers not just because you read about them on TechCrunch. It should be because you know which individuals in those firms you want as partners. So I would even go to the extent of being more specific than just have the names. Have the particular general partner that you would love to have on the board. And so shortlist the first 5 or 7 that you think you would love to have on the board, maybe because of their background or things, or maybe you've followed them for a while and you love the advice they've given, or you've heard from other founders about how helpful they've been on the board. And so tier your list into 3 or 4 phases. Start with the first tier where you know that you would work with any one of them if they gave you a term sheet and have them on the board. So start first, meeting them and get feedback from them. And if you end up getting a term sheet from the first 5 or the first 7, then your process is really short, right? But if that doesn't happen, then go to the next set. And also incorporate the feedback that you're learning. Fundraise can be a great process of learning. Many times founders have told me this, especially the ones who've done it really well, that it has helped push their own thinking about where the company should head. It doesn't mean you change your vision statement, but like how you articulate the story. The gaps in your own vision are things that come up during fundraise pitch meetings. And so founders who do it well really learn from it, learn a lot from it. Ask the investors questions too. Don't think this is a one-way process. Ask them for feedback on the company. Ask them what they truly think about the business potential. Ask them, even ask them for customer intros if they think there are companies in the portfolio that you can use. So this is where I think you can use the fundraise process also as enhancement for learning. Even for building your own business, you may end up getting more customers through the process, right? Enterprise companies, the CEOs who do this really well. They ask for customer intros in fundraise meetings, and they almost always get it. So don't waste that opportunity. So in terms of coming back to your time commitment, I think you should allocate 6 to 8 weeks, if not longer. Sometimes it takes much longer for companies to raise. In the meantime, having will be helpful. So if every decision has to go through you, you may want to figure out a way to delegate a large portion of that during the fundraise process to someone else. Simply because meetings will come up, your calendar will get booked even if it's not booked. There will be additional meetings each firm asks when they start doing diligence. So you just want to be prepared to make sure that you're dedicating time for the fundraise, because that will be your priority.
Mm-hmm. Right on. When founders meet with these 50 or so VC firms, a lot of times they'll get a fair amount of positive response. They'll say, "Okay, I'm interested. Send me a deck," or they'll hear, "Okay, keep me updated. Put me on your investor list." All sorts of answers that say, "I'm interested, but I'm not ready to sign the check right now." And then even some that say, and I've definitely seen this at Demo Day, where many investors will say, "I'm good for the check," but then later on, the founder has a very difficult time pushing all those investors kind of down the funnel to where they're actually consolidating the round and getting them all on board. Do you have any advice on how to kind of consolidate the round, how to get investors to move faster effectively and make them kind of, herd the cats of sorts?
There's a lot of article written on how to read a no from a VC or a maybe from a VC. My view is, look, you need only one true believer, especially in your Series A. Right. You don't need 5. So read the signs, but between those lines. If like someone is saying maybe, someone's not getting back to you, you can definitely nudge them. But you may also want to read the soft signs. Maybe they're not true believers, and that's okay. Airbnb has the famous story of how many people said no to them in the early days. Almost every company has gotten many no's. I don't think anyone had a straight shot yes, ever. So I think that that's why it's more important to spend time understanding and coming up with a strategy of who you want to meet. Is this an investor that really understands the business you are working on or building on the space? Because if you find the right fit earlier on, the process is a lot more smooth. Versus if you go, let me rank all the firms, and you're just hitting the top 50 because of the brand name, that's when the problem arises. So I think it's about finding the right partner and the right firm that knows the space. And then if the others are not nudging, then probably the answer is they're not ready for it yet.
Right on. You talked a lot about right partner. How does an entrepreneur pick the right partner? How does an entrepreneur do investor due diligence? Are there platforms that you recommend to go learn about investors? How do you make sure that you don't get someone on your board that's going to really be difficult to get along with for a long time? How do we do entrepreneur due diligence?
We recommend back channel checks. You absolutely need to do that. Just the way the investor does founder checks, founder reference checks, you should do the same. One, when you get a Series A term sheet and you've decided to accept the term sheet, it's perfectly fine to ask that investor who's coming on the board for references. And you should do those reference calls. And in those calls, you should ask the founders questions about how they operate with the board member, what is their relationship, how are they when things were going well, and how are they when things were not going well, right? You need to know both of those. I would also recommend doing back channel checks. So if there were other portfolio companies that they didn't refer you to, try to meet those founders and ask them, how are they on the board? And I think that's perfectly fine. You should do that. And I think I'm surprised by how very few founders ask for reference checks from board members.
Okay. Let's go back to that stat earlier about how many seed stage companies never make it to A. I think one of the hardest decisions as a founder to make is that decision of when to call it quits, when to seek an exit. Maybe the company hasn't been able to raise in over 2 years. Maybe they've multiple times tried to raise this A, or maybe they just seen their growth kind of stall out. What advice do you give to founders on when to call it quits? I say this. Sometimes I just want to say it might be time to think of some other options, but they're not coming to me for that. I surely don't discourage them. But what advice do you have for founders that should be maybe considering some sort of exit plan or earlier exit than planned?
I think the answer to that is as under you know best when you're hitting a wall. We often tell our founders, and I've seen our founders, persevere at what they're building. And they, as founders, you know a lot more about the problem you're solving than any of us, because that's why you decided to start that company. But at some point, maybe it doesn't make any sense. And I think the problem where I've seen founders make the mistake of, where they fail to call it quits sooner rather than later, is especially when I call it the reality distortion field. Like everyone is telling you something that's clearly a problem, but you have absolutely no clue it's a problem. So let me give you an example. So I'm not going to name any company, but if you are, and this is not even particular to a company, but say, for example, if you're trying to, in the on-demand space, there are lots of companies that were trying to do Uber for X, Uber for Y, Uber for Z. And when you're in that space, you need a lot of cash to scale. There is no network effect. So scale is the only way you differentiate from competition. So how do you do that? You subsidize. Basically, if it costs you $10, you tell the user, pay only $5, and I'll get it done for you. And of course you grow, right? Because you're just giving it 50% cheaper than anything. But at some point, if you don't increase the price, you're not going to sustain. It's not, negative gross margin at 30% growth is just more negative. And the founders sometimes don't realize that. And so at that point, if you're not able to raise money, then you probably are going to, run it to the ground. So that's where I would say if too many people are telling you the same thing, pause. Think about it. And then maybe you'll still say, no, I'm going to go at it. But at least pause and try to reflect on why everyone's telling you that. And by the way, the fundraise process is actually a great signal for that, because you are meeting lots of smart individuals who spend a lot of time in this space. And if everyone is giving you the same feedback, maybe they're all wrong, and often we're all wrong. I completely have to say that. But it's worth pausing and at least asking yourself, what am I missing that these people keep bringing up the same point?
Right on. Well, that's almost all the questions. I just have one question left, so we're going to take questions in just a moment. So get ready with your question, and Ryan will come around with the mic. My last question is, I know, actually, we were just in Beijing together a few months ago, so I know Anu has a very international scope and philosophy of investment. However, most investors here in Silicon Valley just want to invest in, a 30 miles radius around Palo Alto, effectively. What do you think more Silicon Valley investors should be looking internationally for deals, or at least be more open in order to make sure they capture the next big returns? Is now the time for investors to start thinking differently on international investing, or is, for many of them, is the right thing still just to be focused here on Silicon Valley entrepreneurs?
Well, I think it depends on firm by firm and what their philosophy is. But from YC, I would say, we absolutely believe in the global opportunity because, tech is no longer just Silicon Valley. There are great tech companies being built outside of Silicon Valley. China is a great example of that. I think, there was some report that came out maybe a year ago. Don't quote me on this, but I think they did an analysis of billion-dollar companies built in the last 5 years or a decade, and 60% was Silicon Valley and 40% was China. So clearly, companies are getting built everywhere, and I think Bangalore in India will also become an important node in that sort of triangle of where tech companies get built. So I think YC's view very much is that there will be companies built everywhere, and we want to help these companies build and scale. So we will do it for any company anywhere. So I think that, last batch, 40% of YC's portfolio on the early stage was international. And we had companies from even Africa, India, Brazil, Colombia. So we have a wide spectrum in terms of the companies that come to YC.
Hi, my name is Sangeeta, and my company's name is HelpC. We are focused on automating healthcare for clinicians. I have so many questions for you. So I'll ask 3 questions. You can pick which ones you feel is fast to answer. So first question is about reverse vesting for the founders that sometimes like LSA and other investors will do. Where your own equity vests over time as a founder. So what do you think about that? Second question is, what I have thought about in this space with healthcare and companies not making it to Series A is to wait and not get the seed round, so do self-seed round, and then go for Series A. So what are your thoughts about that? And the third question is, I find that in healthcare, it's great that we are starting to see investment and better understanding of the space, but disproportionately, most of the investors are doctors, while the healthcare space is so large and it has the largest number of people are nurses, there are nutritionists, there are all kinds of healthcare professionals who are underrepresented and not well understood in their utilization of healthcare.
So let me clarify the third question. Is the question that most investors are doctors, or is it most companies are catering to doctors?
No, most investors are doctors, and I think sometimes they don't understand the full value of what other people in the healthcare bring. So for example, I'm a engineer and an oncology nurse. So sometimes people think, well, you should have an oncologist, but they don't do the work that I do. And I'm trying to build the solution for nurses, so.
Yeah, I think I would be surprised if it continues. I'll start with the third question. I would be surprised if it continues down that path, because I think, you know, a lot of firms are spending a lot more time in healthcare. Healthcare is the next biggest vertical where I think tech can make a huge change. We're already seeing you know, a lot of companies. For example, YC's first biotech company was a synthetic biology startup, Ginkgo Bioworks, which is based out of Boston. So think about how they got funded. Right, these were 5 MIT PhDs who started the company. So I think that that's definitely changing. So I don't think that would continue to be the situation. I think there are already enough investors who actually do invest in different areas of healthcare. There's definitely a learning curve in that space, but I think there's interest and there is momentum, as a result of which I think it'll only help accelerate. In terms of seed versus, you know, should I do a sell seed, raise the seed? And I think this would be and that's related to the vesting terms and everything. I think, look, if you are building a company where you just need a little more time to get that product market fit, take that time, don't raise the extra money. You know, too often people think that if I put more people at the problem will get solved. It doesn't happen. More people at the problem only makes the problem worse. And I always use the example of Pinterest and Ben Silberman, where he actually spent the first 3 years really trying to get that pin board working so that it would resonate with people. And that means you need only 4 people working on it, or 3. You don't need 10. And that means you don't need to race, and that's okay. But once it took off, and he was able to find enough of a user growth traction, he was able to raise seed. But there is a whole story behind how difficult it was for Pinterest to raise even seed money. You know, that may not be true for certain types of startups where you need a lot of money. For example, I think Netflix could not have used that approach. I think the DVD business and a lot of capital was what helped them pivot to the streaming business. But surely Facebook, Pinterest, I would say even Dropbox in the early days, because it had the consumer, it was primarily a consumer app, had all flavors where you really could tweak the product till you found that product market fit before you went out and raised money. Now, you may need $1 million or you may need 500K depending on where you are, but that's a lot better than saying I need 5 million. And so I think it's more important to make sure that you feel like you are really building a product that's solving a pain point that has a big market opportunity. This is where I would refer to Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. You know, he has this famous saying in the book that make sure you're building something 0 to 1 that has the potential to go from there to 1 to many, if not work for a company that's doing that, right? And I think the longer you spend on it, you'll know whether you have a huge market opportunity.
Thank you for sharing your insights, both of you. I'm Sherry DeVille. I'm the CEO for Metagram, also a healthcare startup. So we are saving lives by getting information instantly there right now for physicians and care teams. We've got a full stack platform, which is a little bit unusual. So it's like a private vertical cloud. And so my question with fundraising has more to do with, you know, optimizing how you spend your time, because, you know, you were talking about product, customers, team, and then also fundraising. And to her point, I don't know that all 30 people that will be appropriate for our space, both for the mobile enterprise aspect and the healthcare aspect. So if we found a partner that we enjoy, that we think has the right expertise and skill set to work with, what is your recommendation in terms of bringing their colleagues over the line? So say you've been through, not really a process, but you've kind of figured out who you'd like to work with, and you want to know, you want to kind of uncover, you know, how to get the firm on board, yes, building consensus. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, usually in most firms, the way it works is if you have one partner who is a true believer, they sort of become the sponsor for your that particular investment opportunity. And it's also their job to convince the rest of the partnership and your job. So I'm not saying the onus is on them. The onus is on both of you to work together to make that happen. And so this is where having a really tight story is extremely important. I would say like a really tight button-down deck, which talks about the team, the product, what it really solves, the roadmap of the product. If you have metrics, the metrics have to be really, really crisp and clear, communicating the value prop of the product and what you plan to do with the race. And many times the all-partner meeting, when you have the all-partner meeting and you're presenting, other people have different questions. Now, the reason why firms do this all-partner meeting is not because you have to go convince them. It's because the person who is sponsoring the investment opportunity is probably really sold or is pretty much leaning towards doing the investment. So the reason you meet the rest of the partnership is to see, they may be biased and they may not be really evaluating all the risks. And so the purpose of the rest of the partnership is to, A, confirm that the strengths are true because of which the partner is excited about, and B, to really poke holes to understand, have they really evaluated all the risks, right? So you should use, just like you would do the first pitch, it's about, the second pitch or the all-partner meeting is also, for you to get to know the rest of the firm. And, even though you may have one board member, there might be expertise of other partners that will be helpful to you along as you scale the company. So it's a way for you to get a sense for, do you also have a fit with the firm? Although more important is the fit with the partner, but still the second importance is that. And third, to really pay attention to what questions they're asking, because sometimes you also may have thought through all the risks, right? So that process just helps you further improve your own thinking.
My name is Dimitri. I'm the founder of Pictobyte. When you were talking about the cost of Series A, you mentioned that there's a range between 20 to 30%, depending on a few factors. But what struck me was that you didn't mention that there is a correlation between how much money you're trying to raise.
Yeah.
That it seemed like, Series A is just 20 to 30%. So if that's the case, is it a bad idea to try to raise as much money as we need to avoid unnecessary dilution and just try to raise as much as possible? Is that not going to have any effect on how much equity we lose?
Yeah,
Thanks.
great question. So I think most investors will be hesitant to give a lot of capital in Series A simply because, unnecessarily it puts the company at risk. And this is where I really want to spend time. Another common mistake the founders do is because they think, oh, I can raise 20 million and 20 divided by 0.3 is my valuation. Now just imagine you did that and your valuation is really high. Now 15 months later, you have to go and raise your Series B, or 18 months later. Because when you have more money, two things always happen, always. I've never seen a company with an exception. You spend more than required, and you do more experiments than needed, and almost all of them fail. And you will run out of money in 15, 18 months. Now you go and you raise. What's going to happen? You don't have traction that proves that you deserve the valuation that you got in Series A. And so inevitably, you put yourself at risk and the company at risk of raising a down round. And that just hurts the morale, your recruitment, and a lot of other factors. And so I think it's very important that you pay attention to the valuation yourself. Even if someone offered you a crazy valuation, the great CEOs do walk away from it because they know that they need to set themselves up for the next round. And so I think it is a function of the money you raise, but the valuation is really important.
I'm Narajan from Confia. I'm in the enterprise IoT space. I have two questions. Does it make a difference to have one Series A investor or have two investors coming for the Series A round, two or more? And the second question is, what do Series A investors expect to achieve, a company to achieve in terms of milestone with the use of proceeds? For example, is it a revenue goal, is it a break-even goal, or some other goal?
The first question is, can there be more than one investor in Series A? Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I think depending on who you raised money from in your seed, you have something called pro rata. And so your existing investors may also want to invest some portion. And then you could potentially get one other investor, as a minority ownership versus someone else takes the major ownership. It's not that common, but it happens. And it happens probably more in enterprise and healthcare than, say, in consumer. Because there are valid reasons for why you may need it from two investors. Your second question, I forgot the second question, sorry. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so in terms of milestones, honestly, the investor is really looking at the founder, the CEO, to tell them what it is. And they want to, I think the only check they're doing is that achievable? Is that believable? Can they actually get there? Whether it's revenue, whether it's growth, whether it's, it all depends on the product. So if you're an enterprise company and, you already have you're selling some and say you have 1 million ARR, then they're really paying attention at what will your revenue goal be. If you're a consumer company and you're not monetizing, but you have active users, then they're looking at goals like what is your monthly active user going to be? Or if it's a marketplace, they're probably paying attention to GMV. But it really depends on what is the product. If it's a hard tech company, like, YC has a ton of them, like Rigetti, quantum computing, Boom, supersonic jets. There, it's really about capital allocation and milestones. Like, okay, 6 months ago, you said we could build this chip. Are they on track to do that? So I think it really depends company to company, but what the investor is looking for is for the CEO to have a clear view, because the test there really is, okay, if they get 5 million or 8 million tomorrow, do they have a plan on how to use it? And do we believe in that plan? That's really the two questions they're asking.
My name is Lala Zhang. I'm the co-founder of an ad tech company called Learning Genie. We're focusing on personalized learning for the early childhood education space. First of all, thank you so much for the insight. I'm learning a lot. I'm getting a lot of my problems solved. My question is, you mentioned that the team is most important. What are the criteria the investor evaluate the team for Series A? Especially for those grassroots founders that has big dream, big vision, and can execute, but don't apparently seem to be having the experience, the background, or success stories that in front of investors, like maybe Airbnb founders fall through that kind of situation too. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, people are not looking at just like your resume or your bio. It's more what is motivating you to build what you're building. And so, there's like different things investors look at. One is, widely talked about as idea maze, which is walk me through the journey of why you arrived at this idea and what is the insight you have that no one else has, because of which you are the right person to build this. At YC, we read 7,000 applications each batch. And pretty much most of them are really, really early. So, but I think, I'd like to think that YC is really good at picking founders. And one of the tests we do is exactly that. Like, what is it about the space or the product that they're building that this is the right person? So often in interviews, we actually learn so much from them about what they're building, because they've really spent a lot of time either research or it was a personal problem they had. It's true as usually in the case of enterprise and healthcare where they were working at a company and they experienced that, or you have experienced it in some form and you really want to change that, right? So I think it's that idea maze. In some cases, it may be domain knowledge, like in the case of Ginkgo Bioworks, which was a synthetic biology startup. It was part of something that they worked in their PhD. And so it made sense as to why they were building what they were building. So it really depends from startup to startup. But one is idea maze, in some cases domain. Third thing they're really trying to measure, but very hard, is grit. Because there's no doubt you're going to have a lot of ups and downs. So the one way to really get that is, some investors, and especially this was true at Andreessen Horowitz, which I really appreciated, was, they would really spend time figuring out, they'll say, start from very early, where did you grow up? Right, and I think part of the reason why you start that, they want to get all the information from then is they are trying to pay attention to what triggers your decision making, and what decisions have you done in life that seemed contrary to most people, and what motivated you to make those decisions. So those things teach you a lot, and tells you about the person you are as well. At YC, for example, in the application, we ask a specific question. Talk about a hack you did very early on in your life that's not related to this company. And you'll be surprised at what we learn. In fact, one of the things we talk about is in the Airbnb interview, when they had applied. I think what really resonated was the fact that to keep Airbnb alive, they actually repackaged the cereal boxes and raised money. It had nothing to do with Airbnb, but it was to keep the company alive. That was the hack. But that's a sign of perseverance. They were not going to give up. And so those are the signs that investors are looking at.
Hi, my name is Njava Mtambo, and I am CEO of Musanga Logistics, a platform that on a mission to transform the way millions of Africans transport products. I noticed that a lot of African startups are getting into YC, so that's great. But my question is, how do you support startups that are in Africa or Asia, particularly Africa in this case? Do you have insight on markets, on how do you basically find the expertise to help startups that are serving different markets from the US?
Yeah. So I think on the early stage side, a lot of the company building challenges that a startup faces are pretty common. At least that's the experience we've seen with the companies so far that have gone through the program. They also benefit from learning from US startups. Some of the, like how to grow your user base. How you do it locally might be a little different, meaning, some of the startups in the US will use Facebook, and maybe in Africa you don't. But I think the drive towards what kind of hacks to use and lessons learned definitely exist, and we've seen even startups in Africa sort of leverage that. I think the second biggest thing is in the batch and the alumni network of YC, you have access to a lot of the startups, which in case you want market-specific advice. But to be honest, more often than not, we've actually seen that these companies benefit more from the company building advice. And that has been something that founders don't expect coming in, but are more than pleasantly surprised as they leave the program. And also these companies have been able to raise successfully out of demo day as well. So I think the benefits you get of being a US startup are also things you get for an international startup.
Hi, my name is Stephen Lamb. I'm a co-founder of Z-Biotics, which is a synthetic biology company. Okay. And my question is about if you're going into your second round, is the mic not on? Oh, sorry, thanks. If you're going into your second round, what sensitivities should you be aware of regarding your prior investors if, say, you want to diversify your investor base, whether you approach them first, how to do that, anything on that topic?
Yeah, I think it, for every answer I'm going to probably say it depends, but it's probably, more companies, not less, I would say probably tend to raise from a different investor for various reasons, because companies are only staying private longer. Median time to go to IPO is 11 years now. So therefore, you may need to continue to raise capital. And so having a few more investors with deep pockets is probably more helpful. But then it has to be the right partners. And so when you are in your Series B stage, right, you may be looking for different type of advice. And also some diversity of thought on the board is going to probably help you as well and help the company. So therefore, I think more often than not, companies tend to raise from investors. Yeah, I think, like, in some cases, existing investors may choose to double down. That happens too. But over the life of the company, it's probably good to have a few sort of diverse ideas and thoughts on the board, in your board composition.
Hi, so my name's Helen, and I'm a legal futurist with Singularity University. My question is based on your own experience. Does a business really need a problem proposition? I'm asking that question looking at businesses that don't, for instance, businesses that sell tickets to Mars. I'm looking at video games or potentially apps, which is pure entertainment. It doesn't add to society apart from having fun as a consumer. So I'm just curious, how do you value that as opposed to really impactful businesses, say, like their synthetic biology or DNA or pharmaceuticals? Thank you.
I think as investors, you're looking at really startups that are fundamentally changing the way things are being done today. So sure, in terms of, people would argue that even about Facebook. It's like, oh, I log in every day and see my friend's feed. But I think it's not, I actually think Facebook has actually changed many people's lives because it did make the world really connected. I found a lot of this is one example, but I found a lot of my friends in undergrad who I went to school in India. And I don't think I'm able to keep in touch with all of them, more than 6,000 miles away without Facebook. So I just think that it really varies, like the perception. With video gaming, I'm no gamer, but a lot of gamers love Twitch, right? And so as an investor, I think we can't block ourselves to who we are and decide to invest in companies that only make sense to us. So we spend a lot of time really understanding what pain point do they solve for the core demographic, which is their core user base, right? And I think, lots of platforms start actually with gaming and then evolve into bigger use cases. So I think as investors, we pay attention to every vertical. There is definitely more interest in hard tech these days because I think even a decade ago, you could argue that tech was only tech, and there were internet companies being built, and it was the app revolution with the iPhone. But now tech is no longer just tech. Tech is disrupting every industry. We have tech in healthcare. We have tech in financial services. We have tech disrupting, through synthetic biology. Tech even in textiles, right? The way a fabric is made is changing. And I think the investors are paying attention to that as well and changing their style of investment accordingly.
Vandana Upadhyay. I'm co-founder of an enterprise software SaaS company. My question to you is, if you are a startup like Workday, which was a very successful enterprise SaaS company, IPO'd. Their average revenue per customer is $250,000. But they were in development for 5 years. After that, they probably got their first beta customer. And then I think they launched in the 7th year, if I recall correctly, the founder's interview in Forbes. So if you are a startup like that, how do you win customers' mindset where they are trained to look for, 50,000 MRR for a SaaS business, for example, and then that doesn't, that plateaus out, so you don't see the growth. And here I have a customer where my customer revenue, the lowest could be $1 million or more, but it's going to take time because these are very big companies, $10 billion companies, $30 billion companies that are going through very long-term strategic view of where they want to go. And my solution is going to get built into where their strategy is going.
Yeah, so I think that's true for a lot of enterprise companies, right? So some of them probably start with SMB, and that's probably why they have some revenue traction. But it's still, they go through the struggle, which is, famously called crossing the chasm, right? So going from SMB to the first enterprise customer is always a challenge. And then even when you start getting few enterprise customers, you first run pilots. It takes a longer sales conversion cycle. Your sales team has to change. You need to now hire a different head of sales. Your sales processes and infrastructure might need to change. I think many enterprise companies go through it. Now, I don't know if they all go through the scenario you're describing, which is they don't have any customer for 5 years and then sort of win the first enterprise customer. I would say at least in the YC portfolio, at least more recent startups, we haven't seen that. I think more often the problem with them is they all start with startups as the customers. Then they gravitate towards like medium-sized startups. Then it may be slightly scaled startups. And now they're all of a sudden signing a contract with a Crate and Barrel or a Nordstorm or an Neiman Marcus or even Cisco for that matter. And they don't know how to negotiate with them or what to set up. And so there is a pain in that growth. But the good news is you have, investors are used to that. They have seen it. It's, no enterprise company went like a straight curve. And, they all went through those challenges. And there are a lot of execs in the Valley who also helped do that transition, right? Where they had to come into a startup and sort of help navigate that shift from an SMB to an enterprise account. So to answer your question, I think are investors familiar with it? Absolutely. I think many enterprise startups go through that.
All right, last question.
Hi, thank you guys. My name is Joseph Douglas. I'm the CEO of Anti-Gravity Industries. We're an electromagnetic levitation and control system company. My question is on the subject of deep tech. A lot of times venture investors in the Valley have short cycles for their fund and short cycles in which they invest and expect an exit, but deep tech companies don't work like that. So how would you advise seed and A-level companies to communicate the timeline and the importance of managing that timeline to these new investors who may not be familiar with the space?
If you asked me that question 8 years ago, I would say it's a problem. I don't think any fund is seeing any exit right now. The median time to go IPO is 11 years. It's not slowing down. And I think there's enough capital in the private markets that most companies stay private longer. So it's actually not true that investors are looking for a short exit. Now, I don't know if you're looking for a horizon of longer than 11 or 12 years. Okay, so that's most investors, almost all VCs in the Valley are completely comfortable with the 10-year exit. I mean, they raise funds with a 10-year life or longer. I mean, YC's first exit pretty much was Cruise, Airbnb, Dropbox, Stripe, none of them have exited. So I think investors are more than comfortable, as long as you're building a long, sustainable, and durable company.
All right, great. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Barrett. Thank you, Edith. I hope you guys got a lot out of this event. We really enjoyed having you guys out here. We're going to be holding these events regularly. Check us out on Facebook. We will definitely be emailing you. Make sure you check out our demos before you leave. And we'll be around here for about a half an hour or so. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to talk to you guys. Thanks again for coming out.
The way you, modern times, the way you measure success of an event,